Thank you so much. Let me just go ahead and get my screen sharing. So thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Matthew. My name is Kyla. I'm the Heritage Program Coordinator for Patapsco Heritage Greenway. Yes, like Matthew mentioned, I'm finishing up a PhD at the University of Maryland in anthropology. My archaeological emphasis is within historic archaeology. I primarily engage with industrial archaeology and labor archaeology, and my work right now is exploring some of the intersections between labor, health, and disability in coal mining company towns in northeastern Pennsylvania. But what I'll be talking about today are some of the archaeological sites in the Patapsco Valley Heritage Area, as well as what the organization I work with, Patapsco Heritage Greenway, does on a regular basis. We have two kind of entities bundled within the work that we do at Patapsco Heritage Greenway. So Patapsco Heritage Greenway itself is the nonprofit management entity of the Patapsco Valley Heritage Area. And the Heritage Area is about roughly 62 square miles that make up the newest of Maryland's 13 certified heritage areas. Heritage areas are a state-run program administered by the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority as a part of the Maryland Historical Trust. And the big emphasis with heritage areas is that individuals, businesses, nonprofits, and governments form partnerships to preserve Maryland's historic sites and towns, natural landscapes, and enduring traditions. Each heritage area is a bit unique. Patapsco Heritage Greenway and the Patapsco Valley Heritage Area in particular. We have an emphasis on both environmental conservation as well as historic preservation. And we try to emphasize the synergies between those two fields. So our mission as Patapsco Heritage Greenway is dedicated to preserving, protecting, interpreting, and restoring the environment, history, and culture of Maryland's Patapsco River Valley for all. We try to emphasize four main focus areas, which we refer to as here, and that's heritage/history, the environment, arts and culture, and recreation. And we have 5 strategic goals to try and help us achieve our vision of that. And that includes stewardship, which we aim to promote and facilitate the stewardship of heritage resources to support interpretation and appreciation of the history of the Patapsco Valley, as well as to enhance the quality of life for residents and ensure a unique visitor experience. We also work towards interpretation to provide heritage experiences for visitors. Focusing on interpreting the Valley's vital importance in Maryland's industrial revolution and its role in Maryland's evolving resource stewardship and conservation ethic. Heritage tourism to increase the economic benefits of heritage tourism in the Patapsco Valley. Recreation to offer residents and visitors opportunities to explore and learn about the heritage area through a variety of quality recreational experiences. And then management. To be a strong and sustainable organization for Patapsco Heritage Greenway in order to continue carrying out the work we aim to do. So I have for you here a map of the Patapsco Valley Heritage Area. The part in yellow is the original heritage area, which in 2015. So the organization has been around in some way, shape, or form and iteration, I believe since the early 2000s, maybe late 90s. I would need to brush up on my institutional history, I'll be honest with that. But I do know in 2015, Patapsco Heritage Greenway celebrated a major milestone when the Patapsco Valley became Maryland's newest and 13th certified heritage area. So this designation depended on the unanimous approval of the PVHA management plan by both Baltimore and Howard County governments. And you can kind of see we kind of straddle parts of the western and southwestern part of Baltimore County, and then the eastern part of Howard County, of a lot of Howard County. And then the parts in pink on this map, I don't know if you can see my mouse highlighting areas.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, good. Yes, and then in 2020, the PVHA boundary expanded northwest from Granite and Marriottsville, so around here, as well as southwest to the Baltimore City County line, including parts of Daniels, Ellicott City, Owella, Catonsville, Ilchester, Relay, and Elkridge. So we're a sizable chunk following most of the Patapsco River and some of its tributaries. Not fully out to the headwaters in Mount Airy, but close. Oops. And this is just a really beautiful photograph of one of the sites within Patapsco Valley State Park, Cascade Falls. It's located, you can access it from entering the park through the Avalon area. But this is just highlighting some of the beautiful natural spaces that we have within the heritage area, as well as historic sites like the Benjamin Banneker Historical Park and Museum located in Owella. And we'll actually talk a little bit more about Banneker Historical Park and Museum in a little bit. So just going to go over a few things PHG does. We have an environmental stewardship program, which is managed by our environmental programs manager, Diana Devers, and we run a variety of programs and initiatives, including things like stream watchers, watershed cleanups, invasive plant removals, tree plantings, and more. Our environmental portfolio is pretty extensive. You can see that we have accomplished some pretty great things in 2022 for having a relatively small staff, including organizing over 1,500 volunteers and removing over 32,000 pounds of trash from the Patapsco River Valley. It's a really great program to engage with, and we do make an effort to, do crossover programming with the environmental program and the heritage program and recreation. So it's exciting we're hoping to see these numbers grow in 2023 and beyond. We also have a corporate events program, which is relatively new, but it's predominantly, a 3-hour afternoon environmental stewardship event, followed by a social at Manor Hill Tavern's outdoor beer garden. It's an exciting initiative we're launching. We've had a few groups work with us and really enjoy it, and we're excited to see this program grow. That's administered by our community programs manager, Rachel Pearson, who I believe is on the call as well. So if you have any extra information to share about this, Rachel, feel free to type it in the chat. We also have a water quality monitoring program, which is run by our environmental programs coordinator, Mandy DeLeo. We measure a variety of metrics, but we look for physical, chemical, and biological parameters. This project has been ongoing for about 2 years now, and we just put out our first water quality report card, again from 2022, after about a year's worth of data collection. And it has some mixed results, as it's probably expected if you're familiar with the Patapsco River Valley. But again, we have more information about this program and all our other initiatives available at our website, which is patapsco.org. But I just wanted to be sure and share some of these with you. The program I run, the Heritage Program, we engage in a variety of programming, including things ranging from lectures to special tours of historic sites. We have an annual Patapsco Day celebration, which is a series of lectures held in March every year. We just held ours in March this year under the theme Patapsco Stories. We also engage in creating historic interpretation content. You can see on the screen let's see here, a flyer for an exhibit on historic Ellicott City's undertakers and funeral homes that I helped put together at the Howard County Visitors Center around Halloween of last year. That was a really great and fun project I collaborated with Visit Howard County for. And I've also done some work with the Howard County Center for African American Culture, located in Columbia, which was also a really great experience. We also have a cemetery preservation program, as well as we're working on building more, but we have a few short history videos that we call Patapsco Shorts, typically 3 to 5 minute just snippets of different aspects of history and the environment within the Patapsco Valley. Like I mentioned, we do crossover programming. A lot of this includes things like historic cemetery cleanups, as well as synergistic family days on the trolley trail, where we have different stations emphasizing each of our 4 pillars across here. They're really fun for the whole family, and we're excited to keep expanding our programming and emphasizing the intersections and relationships between the built environment and the natural environment. So on to the archaeology. So this slide is a little misleading. It's titled Archaeology in the PVHA, but this is a map of Maryland. This is mainly just to give you a sense of the distribution of archaeological sites throughout the state of Maryland. This is utilizing Medusa, Maryland's Cultural Resources Information System. The layer you're seeing isn't publicly accessible, but we're also zoomed out very far, so probably not going to get too much identifying information from this map. But you can kind of see the areas where we're seeing a higher density of sites, particularly surrounding some of the urban city centers. And, as expected, following a lot of major roadways. So zooming in to the PVHA, I didn't have time to trace an outline of our boundary area over this, but if you just kind of follow the Patapsco River Valley, you can kind of see that there's a decent amount of archaeological sites within the PVHA, but not as high a density as there are closer to DC or further south within southwestern Baltimore County, a little beyond where our boundary area extends. But that's just kind of giving you an idea of the visual kind of distribution of sites that we have. So Patapsco Heritage Greenway itself has not engaged in archaeological excavations itself. While I am an archaeologist, we just don't really have the staff to perform excavations, nor do we have the appropriate facilities or space to store or process collections. So what I do a lot, and what is a large emphasis of the Heritage Program, is doing archaeological advocacy and also highlighting archaeological work done within the area, sometimes arranging special tours of sites for the public and whatnot, and also to help facilitate just dialogue between archaeologists working within the PVHA and the surrounding area. So let's see here. I have 4 different sites I am going to highlight for you real quickly. The first two I have a bit more information on just because there have been more recent excavations and more thorough reporting. The first one I'm going to highlight is the Patapsco Female Institute. It's a 19th and 20th century site. Though some prehistoric artifacts have been found, particularly some lithics. In the mid to late 19th century, so roughly 1837 to 1891, the site served as a girls' boarding school. It was originally opened as a girls' finishing school, but beginning in 1842, under the leadership of the school's third headmistress, Elmira Hart Lincoln Phelps, the curriculum shifted to incorporate more mathematics and sciences to enable young ladies to be trained well enough to support themselves through teaching. This was unique for the time period when most schools focused on teaching girls domestic and homemaking skills. The school eventually closed in 1891 due to continued decline in enrollment. Around 1891 or shortly after, it was converted into a summer hotel called the Berg Alnick Hotel until about 1905. It was then utilized as a private residence from about 1905 until 1917, during World War I, when the building was called into service as a hospital. In later years, the building was used as a theater and again as a private residence. And by 1958, the property was sold to its final resident, Dr. Wisman, for use as a nursing home. However, the structure began to deteriorate and had to be closed soon after in 1960 for safety concerns. The property was willed to Dr. Wisman's alma mater, the University of Cincinnati, when he passed in 1965, and was purchased soon after by Howard County in 1966. But it wasn't until about the 1990s that the ruins of the school were stabilized, or when stabilization commenced. So there have been a few archaeological excavations held at the site, the first of which were performed in 1987 through 1989 by Lee Preston. Lee Preston was hired by the Howard County Department of Recreation and Parks to conduct archival research and archaeological investigations of the property. The second round of archaeological investigations occurred during the 1993 summer season, prior to the construction associated with the stabilization of the ruins by Dr. James Gibb. These excavations uncovered several features, including the foundation of 3 framed additions, identified as the schoolroom, which was built in 1879, the dining hall, which was built in 1880, and a hotel addition, which was built in 1893. Like I said, the ruins were stabilized within the 1990s, and when that was complete in 1995, Lee Preston returned to the site and developed a public archaeology program in partnership with the Upper Patuxent Archaeology Group, as well as the county's Department of Recreation and Parks. And this ran for an extensive period, from roughly about 1994 to 2010. Campers, students, and volunteers continued to excavate the kitchen midden, which was located to the north of the ruins, in hopes of identifying the vertical and horizontal boundaries. Since May 2019, Kelly Palick has actually been working at the site as well. She's currently the archaeologist associated with the Howard County Department of Recreation and Parks. And you'll be hearing her name a few more times throughout this conversation, so, or presentation. So, but in May 2019, she was brought in to monitor the removal of an ash tree that was adjacent to the back entrance gate. This removal and stump grinding exposed another possible structural feature, which was subsequently documented and photographed. And excavations actually continue today. Kelly's actively running work this summer, and she recently helped utilized archaeology to help inform the placement of the Mary Jerdone Coleman Garden in 2022 as a part of Ellicott City's 250th founding celebration. And that was a very exciting garden as well. Archival research found a student's journal which actually had floral samples from the garden because of some botany lessons they had done where they had pressed some of the flowers. So they were actually able to utilize that garden to inform what plants they would be planting in the memorial garden. So that was a really cool project. Volunteers are still able to help out at excavations at the site. And we've worked with Kelly before to run some site tours where she talks about the archaeology as well. So that is the first site I have for you today. The second site is located nearby in Owella in Baltimore County, and that's the Benjamin Banneker Homestead. The site is an early 18th through early 19th century African-American farmstead associated with Benjamin Banneker. Banneker is famously known as America's first Black man of science. Banneker was born into a free Black family in Maryland in 1731, which is rather significant. His family was one of the first free Black families to settle in the area. And in a list of taxables in the 1737 Patapsco Upper Hundreds, the Bannekers are the only free Black family listed as residing in Baltimore County. And for those unfamiliar, hundreds is a historic term for a political subdivision of space. From the late 1600s to the early 1800s. In Maryland, the term was applied as a political subdivision of the county, primarily for tax and judicial affairs. So that's part of Banneker's contextual significance. By 1775, by the 1775 census of Baltimore County, there are only 212 free Black individuals residing in Baltimore County. So this site is, particularly exciting in part because it helps to tell the story of a free Black family living in antebellum Maryland. Benjamin Banneker, like I mentioned, was born in 1731, and he would become famous for his knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and technical instruments, as well as assisting in surveying the boundary for the new United States capital city, Washington, D.C., with Andrew Ellicott. Banneker is also remembered for the almanacs he published annually from 1791 until 1797. His almanacs were innovative not only because they were produced by a Black man in an age when African Americans were often considered incapable of scholarly accomplishment, but because they also had commentaries, literature, and editorials that had a political and humanitarian purpose. He even corresponded with Thomas Jefferson on the topics of slavery and racial equality, and publishers included some of this correspondence within his almanacs in 1793. The Ellicotts took over ownership of the property following Banneker's death in 1806, but a fire burned down the homestead around the same time, and the structure was not rebuilt during that time. The first archaeological work performed at the site was done in 1979. By Charles Wygant and local archaeologists. The goal of these excavations was to try and find the location of one or both of Banneker's former homesteads at the site, working off of a few descriptions from primary sources dating to the mid-18th century, but they were not found at that time. Wygant identified 2 additional areas to search for the location and of the homesteads, and in 1982, the Baltimore County Department of Recreation and Parks, who at that time became the administrators and I believe the owners of the site, asked the Maryland Historical Trust to survey the site. And so they sent out Robert Hurry to survey the site. And they were able to locate what was likely the farm area and potentially one of the homesteads that Banneker grew up in, based on artifacts indicating an 18th century residence. One moment. Yes, it is in Banneker Historical Park and Museum. Yep. That's where that's located. It's within the grounds of that park and museum. And in January 1985, the county subsequently purchased a part of the original 100-acre Banneker land tract in order to establish the historical park to commemorate Benjamin Banneker and ensure the preservation and study of the site. Since 1985, the park has been developed and open to the public. It also includes a museum as well as some trails at the site. Let me see here. So 1985 is also when more intensive archaeological work begins. Kristen Peters was the project director for the 1985 Phase 1 shovel test survey. And then Robert Hurry works at the site again in 1986 for the Phase 2 investigation of the site. It's during the 1986 excavations that a stone foundation and what is interpreted as an exterior chimney base were found. The types and dates of the diagnostic artifacts recovered, a proportion of which were melted or burned, provided the basis for hypothesizing that this feature represented a house site that burned in the early 19th century. Possibly the house that Banneker lived in as an adult, which burned down shortly after his death in 1806. So that was a really exciting find. And a reconstruction of that cabin was actually completed in 2009. That is the image you see on screen right now. And it's now a part of the museum's tours and programming. It's also available to be unlocked for visitors by request if you're not on a tour going to it. I believe some work is being done on the museum right now, but the grounds are still available to walk through. But when it's fully open again, it's a really great site to visit. All right, the third site I'm highlighting is the Belmont Estate, which is a mid-18th to 20th century farmstead and plantation. The site's associated with the Dorsey family, who built several iron forges on the tributaries of the Patapsco River in the early to mid 18th century. One of the Dorseys, well, the Dorsey who initially occupied the estate, who helped establish these iron forges, was Caleb Dorsey in the early 1700s, I believe around 1738 or so. Being a plantation, there were enslaved people who lived and worked on the estate. I'm a little unclear as to exactly how many lived there over the course of time, but I've identified that in 1799, following his passing, tax records indicate Edward Dorsey, who was the son of Caleb, held 36 enslaved people as a part of his estate. And then again in 1860, we see mention of slaves in a federal slave census, which shows Edward's grandson, Charles Hanson, owning 10 enslaved people at the estate. So this is another site which has a lot of potential to tell us more about the lives of enslaved peoples within the area of Baltimore County. Yes, the Belmont Estate is also publicly accessible to the public. All the sites I'm showing are accessible to the public through tours or on state land, and can be accessed. I'm not highlighting anything on private property. So let me see here. Yes, of course. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just refinding my place in my notes real quick. Okay, so Archaeological work is actually pretty recent at this site. The earliest work that was done was in 2016 by our Christopher Goodwin and Associates. Let's see here. They performed a phase 1 survey of a proposed walkway and patio project at the Belmont Estate. Monitoring of the walkway and patio project more monitoring took place in 2017, and artifacts from these projects mainly consisted of kitchen-related and architectural artifacts. Our Goodwin and Associates also engaged in a phase 1 survey in 2019 prior to the installation of water lines, which again yielded a similar assemblage. Further work was done in 2019, but by the Howard County Department of Recreation and Parks, by Kelly Palin. She also monitored the excavation of 11 or 12 utility trenches at the site, which uncovered one historic feature, a brick foundation, which is believed to be a previously undocumented outbuilding associated with 18th or 19th century occupation, as well as an artifact assemblage that suggests an additional undocumented outbuilding associated with 19th century occupation. So currently the site is managed by the Howard County Department of Recreation and Parks and goes by the name the Belmont Manor and Historic Park. The estate is accessible to the public via the Howard County Conservancy's Nature Preschool, as well as the occasional special event that the Howard County Conservancy puts on. And then it's also available during special events hosted by the Howard County Department of Recreation and Parks. And I'm currently working with Kelly to try and get a similar tour of the Belmont Estate to talk about some of the archaeology the way we've done at the Patapsco Female Institute. So once that is finalized and we have a date and some programming available, I'll also be sure to send that flyer over to Matthew so he can share it with you guys at the Archaeology Club in case anyone would like to join.
That sounds great, Kyla. Thank you.
Yeah. So I will go ahead and get to the last site that I have to highlight, which is the Elysville Rock Shelter. I've included a slight asterisk because that is how Elysville is supposed to be spelled, but the archaeology report put an extra E in there between the L and the Y. So it technically looks like Elysville, which might actually be how it's supposed to be pronounced. Again, I'm from Michigan, so I'm not 100% sure of all the pronunciations out here. Oh, thank you, Justine. Yes, the Belmont Estate is available to rent for special events like weddings as well. So that's another thing you can do at Belmont. Yes, so the Elysville Rock Shelter. It is a woodlands period rock shelter, and interestingly, the only cave in Howard County. This is an interesting site to me, in part because there is very little documentation of the work done there. Some early excavations are described by J.D. McGuire in 1880. J.D. McGuire was a state's attorney who lived in Ellicott City, who was also a student of archaeology and ethnology. He was associated with the Bureau of American Ethnology and was an officer of the Anthropological Society of Washington, who amassed a pretty sizable collection of prehistoric artifacts from Howard County and the surrounding region. He later donated this collection to the Smithsonian. He reports in this 1880 report that there are 2 sites, which is why I've included 2 site numbers, but it is unclear if McGuire is indicating that there were 2 rock shelters or if one was the rock shelter you see on screen. and another site was an activity area. Unfortunately, I actually have not been able to track down the specific primary source that was cited in 1880. The primary reason I know it exists is because Tyler Bastian, Maryland's first state archaeologist, did an archival investigation of sites throughout Maryland, and he filled out a report for the site in 1971. So no actual field visit was performed by Bastian, and he was solely working off of a passage of undetermined length from a primary source in 1880. So this is a naturally occurring rock shelter from the Woodlands period, or at least the artifacts that McGuire in 1880 described are from the Woodlands period. He describes a layer of ash, a knife, a scraper, 6 shell-tempered sherds, and bone fragments. So this cave itself, it's pretty accessible. It's located within Patapsco Valley State Park, near the Daniels area. If you Google Camel's Den Cave, which is the colloquial name for the rock shelter, there are a number of blog posts describing which trails to take to get to the cave. But there's just incredibly limited information on the site. But if anyone is familiar with a primary source put out by J.D. McGuire in 1880, I've been trying to track this down for months now. So if you're familiar with it, please let me know. Or if you're a whiz with finding primary sources with incredibly limited information, I don't even have a title for what it is, just the date and a page number. Feel free to reach out. But yeah, so I just wanted to make sure I hit a variety of sites. We, have some stuff exploring, women's archaeology, African American archaeology, some prehistoric and historic sites. There's plenty of more, both on public and private lands, but reports are of varying quality depending on when they were done. So these are just the 4 I wanted to highlight, especially because they are publicly accessible as well. Let's see here. I just got a few more slides to wrap up. So if you are interested in more information on archaeology in the Patapsco Valley Heritage Area, we actually have a few recorded lectures that were given as part of our annual Patapsco Day celebration in 2022 and 2023. I have a talk by Kelly Palick entitled Preserving the Past, Why Archaeology Matters in the PVHA. And in this talk, she actually goes more in depth into some of the excavations at both PFI and the Banneker Museum and Historical Park. So that's a really great talk to watch if you're interested in those 2 sites. And then we also have a talk digging more into some of the prehistoric archaeology and pre-contact archaeology by Dr. Catherine Sterner from Towson University, entitled Documenting Early Life and Early Archaeology Along the Patapsco River. Yeah, she helped connect me with you guys, so she's wonderful. And as I'm sure many of you know, a really just engaging speaker. So if you're interested in checking out her talk on that as well, she actually used some of your archaeological collections for that talk. So that's also available on our YouTube page. Just before I close out, I just want to highlight a few opportunities to work with PhDs. So for individuals, we're always accepting volunteers for various programs and initiatives. I've put the link on screen where you can see our volunteer form and learn more about the different programs you can volunteer for. And we also have regular events for public programming, ranging from educational lectures to tree plantings and cemetery cleanups. I've included the link to our calendar of events as well. And then for groups, we have PhD's corporate program, which I talked about a little earlier, but then we also have some pretty great funding opportunities, which are primarily available through the Maryland Heritage Authorities, Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. So we offer sponsorships up to $1,000. These can often be used for things like fabricating interpretive signage. We've had a few groups utilize it to purchase materials for cemetery cleanups. It can be utilized for things to pay for like a shuttle in order to take a field trip. If you guys are ever interested in organizing an archaeology club field trip to the PVHA and one of the sites within the PVHA, consider applying for a sponsorship. And that could probably cover a shuttle and maybe lunch somewhere. So check some of those opportunities out. We also have a mini grants program, which funds projects up to $5,000. And then for projects specifically within the heritage area, groups are eligible to apply for a Maryland Heritage Areas Authorities grant through us, which can fund up to $50,000 for non-capital and programming projects and up to $100,000 for capital improvement projects. More information is also available on those opportunities through our website at patapsco.org, and particularly the program grants are a really good opportunity to also help fund projects like archaeological excavations, in case anyone has any projects they're interested in pursuing in the Patapsco Valley. So I just wanted to make you aware of those opportunities. And thank you for your time. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really glad I got to highlight some of these sites for you. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Matthew.
That was so neat, Kyla. So I wondered if you could talk maybe just a little bit about that process of finding information in documents. It was kind of interesting how you described the primary sources attached to the Eli'sville rock shelter, and you don't really know what you're looking for, but you know there's information that you need out there somewhere. I assume that happens a lot, and a lot of what you do is archaeology of documentation in a way. Can you say something about that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first place I always go to when I'm looking at sites is Medusa. They have the site reports. Sometimes it doesn't always have everything up to date, reports tend to have to be finished before they can be submitted and uploaded. And for those who have worked in the field, you know that you can do a dig in 2018 and you finish the report in 2022 sometimes. I'm in that situation personally, trying to wrap it up quickly and be a better archaeologist, but life and work happens. So there's that, but I always start with Medusa. After that, I try to engage with the archaeologists themselves if they are around and accessible to contact. But sometimes I just have to start with the report and then go to individuals. In some of these cases, as you saw, some of these sites are administered by like county departments. So they have additional resources they can point me towards, especially if they've engaged in any research of their own. But yeah, I read a lot of reference sections and a lot of footnotes, and it's a lot of cross-referencing of materials. The Maryland State Archives are incredibly helpful, as well as local historical societies. They're where I get some of my richest information, especially individuals who may have donated archival materials themselves to specific libraries. They're able to point me in the direction not only of the library and collection, but the archivist themselves to kind of streamline things. So, um, I that's it.
Yeah, totally. No, I get it. And so you also said that a lot of what you're working with is studies that are going back to the 1970s and 1980s. How much of that stuff is actually still useful? Do you find that the methodology has changed so much that you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, or what's that like?
um, yeah. So archaeological standards were very different in the 70s and 80s compared to today. I believe some of the um, most impactful policies and legislations that have impacted archaeological reporting happened in the 90s, around like 1994. So you do see a noticeable difference in the thoroughness of reports from the mid 90s to today, with a lot more thick description, particularly of landscapes and location, with sites like the Elysville Rock Shelter that I mentioned. The report for that and the description was maybe about 5 sentences, two of which were describing an estimation of feet from the stream. And that's not necessarily the most usable, especially since it was from a report written in 1880. So presumably there would be some erosion of the stream line and the shoreline. So that's not even necessarily the
And it was
best.
probably based on like the width of his stride or something. It took
Yeah,
me, like 3 steps, so it's this far.
yeah, yeah. So, and I know a bit about JD McGuire, but not his height to estimate what a pace would be. So, um, yeah, just the metrics required to report are incredibly different today than some of these earlier archaeological investigations. And I would say that probably the production of site plans is most noticeably different, as well as some of the most useful changes that I've seen in some of these reports. So it's also interesting to see how archaeology has become more professionalized, not just within the state, but to a broader extent, the country. Over time, by reviewing things like archaeological reports, it goes a lot from only recording interesting artifacts like lithics and projectile points to including some of those things like uh, architectural artifacts from 18th and 19th century outbuildings. You don't see a lot of people doing uh, early archaeology of the prehistoric period in Maryland, recording a lot of the abandoned and decrepit and ruinous outbuildings that they come
Oh,
across. Only the lithics. But we see a lot more mention of those mixed context assemblages in later reporting as well.
neat. Thank you.
Okay,
Oh,
so the question is, how is the county protecting these sites from the impact of climate change? That is a great question. So again, a lot of that varies county to county. Um, and there's limited stuff that can be done, particularly on private property. I know on a lot of county property, especially for newer projects, um, they are requiring, in a lot of cases, environmental impact statements, which have to um, take into consideration the impact of future weather conditions, and also, especially within the Patapsco River Valley, kind of anticipated environmental hazards such as flooding. So particularly when it comes to preservation of sites, if there is any type of rehabilitation of a site going on that can impact the materials utilized. But when it comes to protecting archaeological sites from flooding, often the best way to do that is to leave them in the ground. Don't expose them to further, environmental exposure and whatnot. So it's a mixed bag, and it's going to depend county to county, as well as whatever additional state and or federal policies get put into place. Looting of archaeological sites, unfortunately, yes, it happens all the time. That's part of why we don't necessarily make site locations publicly accessible. If you go to Medusa, which you can find pretty easily just by Googling Medusa, Maryland Cultural Resources, it won't have the archaeology layer accessible to you as a member of the public. You have to apply for an account with the Maryland Historical Trust in order, and kind of basically just provide your credentials and convince someone on application that you have enough professional experience to be an ethical practitioner and not abuse the privilege of being able to access the information. So yeah, that's part of why people tend to be careful not to show you where necessarily artifacts are coming out of the ground directly. And also part of why when we're cleaning up after a dig, we again practice leave no trace. Very similar to when you're going hiking, we don't want to leave any evidence that we were there. And part of that is so that if you go into a place, you're not seeing like a square patch of ground that very clearly looks like something happened there. If we've already told you archaeological excavations have happened there, if you know what a 5 by 5 meter excavation unit looks like with that depression in the ground, that can be a real key place that looters would start digging to try and find additional materials. So that's, again, very carefully re-leveling out the site when we fill back up excavation units and trying to make sure, the grass, even the grass seed that we choose is the same as the type of grass that's growing there already, so that we're not introducing different flora, which could also indicate disturbance to the landscape. Okay, when artifacts are found in this large area, where do they go? Who stores them? State, county, city, etc. So ownership, pretty much in every case, is with the landowner. So at all of these sites, the landowner is the owner of collections and the artifacts. In most of these cases, it's either the Howard County Department of Recreation and Parks or the Baltimore County Department of Recreation and Parks. So both organizations have their own repositories and storage facilities. Yeah, I know the Howard County one is located in West Friendship at the Living History and Heritage Farm Museum. Kelly Palek oversees that. I do not have the same information for Baltimore County. Oh, yes. Thank you, Justine. Justine used to be the director of the, well, were you the director or the environmental person at Banneker? But yes, Baltimore County owns the Banneker artifacts. The best are at the museum itself, located within Owella, and the rest are at the Mac Lab at Jefferson Patterson. Thank you, Justine, the former director of the Banneker Museum and current PhD board member. Let's see here. And then I'll be frank again with the Elysville collections. I know there was a handful of artifacts reported in 1880. I have no idea where those went. I don't think Tyler Bastian knows where they went when he wrote up the report based on the archival info in 1971. I could check further with the Maryland Geological Society, which is where Bastian was initially working out of as the first state archaeologist, and see if they might have any further info. But I don't think so. I think he would have included that information in the report if he knew. So unfortunately, I don't know about those and whatnot. But the others we mentioned are owned by the various counties.
Got it. Thank you also for including the information about volunteer opportunities. I'm sure some of our members will be interested in that, and also the information about tours. I'll try to follow up with you about that. That was great.
Yeah,
Any other
absolutely.
questions, everybody? All right, I guess that's it. Be sure to join us again on September 20th. We'll have Daniel Dean, who's the research chair for the Marshy Point Nature Center Council. So more information about local or quasi-local sites. Thanks, Kyle. I really appreciate it. Awesome talk, awesome expertise. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.